So I have been asked to cover the regional implications of the question of Iran, is Iran heading for a collapse? Because Iran, for the let's say at least since 1979, has been determined to have a grip on the Middle East region. You know, the Iranians have a constitution, and one of the elements of the Iranian constitution is the export of the Islamic Revolution. People forget that, they don't like to know that, so that the question of how economic change in Iran affects the ability of Iran to export its revolution is really critical. There's a second element here. You know, you all remember when complaints were voiced with respect to the JCPOA. If I don't need, do I need this microphone?
Yeah, you.
You do. Okay.
It's broadcast.
Show me.
Show me. When the first complaints were voiced about the JCPOA, one of the underlying assumptions, I would call it the intellectual substructure of the whole effort, was that Iran would now become a more moderate country. And this became revealed in a very important article in the New York Times Magazine about the activities of Ben Rhodes, who was Deputy National Security Advisor of the United States under the Obama administration, but really dealt with selling the JCPOA to the media. And if you look at the article by Samuels about Ben Rhodes and his role, you'll see that one of the decisions they made was to talk about the interaction between the Iran agreement and the future expected moderation of Iran. And of course, one didn't see one iota of evidence that Iran was shifting its direction in terms of its regional activism. In fact, all the evidence pointed in a totally different direction. I was looking at the Iranian state budget for 2017, 2018, and they run it from March to March. And there you saw increases in the funds made available to the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards. You also saw increases for ballistic missile forces. By the way, some of this also is evident in the discussion about the upcoming budget for 2018-2019. Iran was relying on having more cash on hand for the export of the revolution. In short, for making trouble in the Middle East. If Iran doesn't have the cash available, the question that immediately arises, will Iran's behavior or Iran's impact on the region change? It's my view that Iran has made a priority of the funds that it gives to the Revolutionary Guards, to the Quds Force, to acquisition of armament with strategic reach, and will be extremely reluctant to cut back those programs. And the people in the street, I think, are basically aware of it. So it will create internal difficulties for Iran. Now, are there theaters that will be affected most directly? Back in 2010, the Iranians announced something called the Axis of Resistance. And that were those were the areas where they expected to have a strategic impact on the internal situation. This is, of course, the most important example of this to Israel is Syria and Lebanon. Lebanon, where Hezbollah was born as a outgrowth of Iranian military power. People forget that the Revolutionary Guards were already stationed in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon in 1983. They didn't wait for great longer period of time. And in Syria, part of our entire national discussion in Israel today is about the growth of the Iranian presence, Iranian military bases, Iranian military deployments, and the deployment of another phenomenon that has been evident in the last number of years, and those are the Shiite militias. The Shiite militias that come from a number of countries with Shia either majorities or in most cases minorities. But I'm speaking about Shia militias that come out of Iraq, that come out of Yemen, out of Afghanistan and Pakistan. People forget that as a result of the war between the Taliban and Iran, there are large numbers of refugees, Afghan refugees, living in Iran. And these people are easily exploited for Shia militias, and they have been brought into Syria. Iran has also been interested in ethnic cleansing. Who are the Arabs that have been leaving Syria, either for Jordan, for Turkey, or for Europe? I'm sure if somebody did a systematic poll, they would find out they're Sunni Arabs. And who have come in? Shiites. And so the whole ethnic composition of Syria is going through a dramatic change. This is also part of the Iranian program. Now, Iran has probed in other areas that generally have not been in the headlines. We know from our own contacts that the Iranians have made an effort to spread Shia Islam in eastern Turkey. I'd like to see what President Erdogan has to say about that. They have also been busy over the last number of years in making offers to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, with the idea being that Iran wants to increase pilgrimage tourism in southern Jordan. Now, what is in southern Jordan? Before I looked into it, I thought there's just a lot of sand. But actually, southern Jordan is full of shrines of individuals who in the 7th century were companions of the Prophet Muhammad. For example, you all know that in Shia Islam, Ali, the cousin of Muhammad, who was married to Muhammad's daughter, he has a special place as being the first imam. And the successors of Shia leadership come out of the descendants of Ali, including Hussein, Hassan, et cetera, et cetera. So it turns out, where is Ali's older brother, Jafar bin Abi Talib? Where is he buried? In Jordan. That's like the royal family of Shiism. And therefore, that would be a perfect place for Iranian pilgrims to arrive. Now, the arrival of Iranian pilgrims is not just let's go to Disney World. It happens to be something which can lead to the penetration of a country. For example, there is the Zainab Shrine outside of Damascus, which the Iranians have made not just a big deal about religiously, but they keep having to put in forces to protect the Zainab Shrine from potential Sunni extremists, so that the existence of Shia shrines in a Sunni country or in a mixed country are a way that Iran penetrates and has influence in that country. Iran has been allocating in its annual budgets money for the propagation of the Shiite faith. That's exactly where this fits in. Now, luckily, King Abdullah has had the wisdom to not be tempted by these Iranian offers for pilgrimage. Clearly, Jordan could use the funds and has needed the funds all along. but he has refused this offer, the offers that have been made by the Iranians to supply Jordan with gas, with oil, and understood implicitly the dangers of Iranian penetration. Iran has had a number of setbacks too. Probably its biggest setback is Sudan, which you might remember was pro-Iranian for many years. In fact, this gave Hamas special access to Sudan. Iranian ships could come through from the Gulf, from Bandar Abbas, up into the Red Sea, reach Port Sudan, and unload weaponry for Hamas. Well, that line of supply has been now cut. Why? Because Sudan decided to break away from the axis of resistance, and instead, I don't know what's on behind me, but okay, I don't know, maybe it's cartoons. It broke away from the axis of resistance, and it joined with the pro-Saudi axis in the Yemen war. There's one other, I mean, there are many places where the Iranians are active, but one other that I wanted to point out. You might recall that Morocco, about 7 years ago, cut diplomatic relations with Iran, largely because the Iranians are very busy trying to propagate the Shiite faith and convert Sunnis into Shiites. The Moroccans got wind of what the Iranians were doing and cut diplomatic relations. Well, they restored them about a year ago. But then again, the Iranians were caught with their hands in the cookie jar, meaning that the Iranians were seeking to develop a strategic relationship with the Polisario, who are the guerrilla force fighting for the liberation of Western Sahara. I say liberation in quotation marks. Western Sahara is under Moroccan sovereignty, and Morocco is determined to keep Western Sahara under Moroccan sovereignty. But as a result of this new connection between Iran and the Polisario, which has been run out of the Iranian embassy in Algiers, there has been a growing tension between Morocco and Iran. Most importantly for our discussion today, it shows the extent of the Iranian outreach in the Middle East. And clearly that outreach requires money, it requires income, and if the income is cut, the Iranian ability to engage in that kind of troublemaking is more limited. I still believe, and I said this earlier, the Iranians prioritize forces like the IRGC, like the Quds Force, and if the supermarkets are a little bit barren, so what? It's these ideological aspects of policy that interest the Iranian leadership, that interest the supreme leader, and not questions of what the people need. And you see in the protests a definite awareness of this choice. I believe it's extremely important for the West to tighten the sanctions regime as much as possible, to make, used to call it in the West, guns and butter. You can't have both. Well, you can't have revolution and no oil income. And the more that choice, the more that reality is presented to the Iranians at present, the more Iranians feel, and upper echelons in Iran feel, that Iran is in danger of, if not of collapse, certainly a weakening of its economic infrastructure, the more we have a chance of doing what the JCPOA was supposed to do, and that is create more moderate behavior by the Iranian leadership.